So previously, we learned about the parts and the different structures of an angiosperm or a flowering plant. Now in this video, we will explore in detail the reproductive stage in the life cycle of a flowering plant. We will also tackle why flowers fertilize twice, hence double fertilization, and understand the various ways of how seeds are dispersed. Let's recall that the life cycle of angiosperms includes an alternation of generation. This describes the life cycle of a plant as it alternates between a sexual phase and an asexual phase. In this life cycle, a diploid sporophyte alternates with a haploid gametophyte. The diploid plant, the sporophyte, produces haploid spores via meiosis, and these spores divide by mitosis, giving rise to multicellular gametophytes, the male and the female haploid plants that produce gametes, which are sperm and eggs. So to better understand this, there are a lot of complex terms mentioned. We will recall the different concepts such as mitosis, meiosis, diploid, and haploid. So to understand the terms diploid and haploid, let us examine the image shown. For example, a hypothetical organism has 3 sets of chromosomes in its cells, which is in this illustration, the pink, the blue, and the green chromosomes. This organism having a complete set of chromosomes are said to be diploid. This means that the chromosomes come in pairs. One is inherited from the mother and the other is inherited from the father. We can represent a diploid chromosome as 2n. The value of n represents the number of chromosomes in the organism. So in this example, we multiply 2 to the total number of chromosomes, which is 3. So then we have a total of 6 chromosomes. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chromosomes. They are 6 in number because they have 2 copies from each chromosome, which is 3. On the other hand, an organism that is haploid would have a single set of chromosomes or simply no pair. Haploid is represented by letter N, and so we can say that the haploid number of chromosomes in our example is 3. We have 1, 2, and 3. So when is a cell diploid and when is it haploid? That can be answered by the 2 types of division cells undergo. Mitosis is the cell division happening in the body cells. Our skin cells, for instance, divide mitotically to replace lost or damaged cells. The cells produced via mitosis are identical to each other. Meaning to say, if the body cells of humans consist of 46 chromosomes, the cell that will be produced after division will be having 46 chromosomes as well. Meiosis, on the other hand, is another type of cell division that happens in sex cells, which are the sperm and the egg cells. The sex cells produced via meiosis are haploid, meaning it contains a single set of chromosomes. So sperm and egg cells of humans have 23 single set of chromosomes. The number of chromosomes for these sex cells should be reduced so that when they unite during fertilization, it can produce a zygote that is diploid in number. Now that we have recalled the concepts of mitosis and meiosis, we can now explain how a flower is fertilized. But first, let us discuss how sperm cells and egg cells are formed and how they unite once they are formed. So recall that microspores develops into the male gametophytes, which are the pollen grains. So first, a microspore parent cell, as you can find here, this one, okay, divides via meiosis and ends up with 4 microspores. Each of these 1, 2, 3, 4, each of these 4 microspores eventually become a pollen grain. This is a pollen grain. And if you look closely inside a pollen grain, okay, there are actually 2 cells. The larger cell the one that looks like a boomerang, will eventually produce a pollen tube. This pollen tube will be very important because it serves as a pathway for the sperms later on to reach the canals leading to the ovary of the flower. The smaller cell inside the pollen grain will further divide to form two sperms. Why are there two sperms? Because in angiosperms, fertilization happens twice, hence the term double fertilization. But we will take note of that later on. On the other hand, megaspore develops into the female gametophyte called the embryo sac. This is the embryo sac. Okay? The embryo sac is contained within the ovary of the flower. So first, a megaspore parent cell divides via meiosis and ends up with 4 megaspores. So we have here 1, 2, 3, and 4. But as you can see in this illustration, the 3 megaspores are too small to be viable, so only one survives, the largest one. Okay? This large and only one megaspore divides further 3 times via mitosis. So if we count that, the total number of cells produced is 8. We have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Eventually, 2 from this 8 that was produced will move in the middle and fuse together, thus becoming one cell with 2 nuclei. Okay? And the result is a 7-celled structure with 8 nuclei. So how is that possible? For a clearer representation, let's examine the illustration in here. From the 8 generated haploid cells, okay, 2 of the haploid cells will move in the middle and join, forming a diploid cell. Why did it become a diploid cell? Because when you combine 2 haploid chromosomes, you form a complete set. Hence, this becomes now a diploid number. So this is one cell with 2 nuclei. Okay? One cell with 2 nuclei. Another 3 cells out of the 8 generated haploid cells will move at the end of the embryo sac, and later on this will disintegrate. Another 3 will move into the entry of the embryo sac. The cell that is closest to the entry will become the egg cell. Now, we shall focus on the central cell, okay, as well as this egg cell, because they will be fertilized later on by the 2 sperm cells that we have discussed. Now, finally, you are looking at the general overview of the life cycle of angiosperms. When humans reproduce, sexual intercourse brings sperm to an egg cell and the embryo develops into a fetus. Clearly, in flowering plants, it's different from our own. We have learned that through pollination, whether from biotic or abiotic means, this delivers the sperm into the egg in angiosperms. So in the following slides, we will explore the process of sexual reproduction in detail. Now first, after a seed has germinated and the plant has grown and developed into maturity, flowers will begin to form. Once the flowers have formed, the next step is to produce microscopic male and female gametophytes. Inside the anther's pollen sacs, diploid cells divide by meiosis to produce the 4 haploid microspores. Meanwhile, meiosis also occurs in the female flower parts, and the diploid cell in megaspores initially produces the 4 haploid cells. Now, 3 of these cells disintegrate, leaving 1 large megaspore. So, both of these sex microspores, okay, sex cells that will become sex cells later on, as you can see, undergoes meiosis. However, the difference is that for the microspore, okay, there are 4 that was formed, and for the megaspore, there is only 1. Now, in the anther of the flower, each of the 4 haploid microspores, okay, develops and forms pollen grains. So each one of these will become a pollen grain. Now inside, okay, each of these pollen grains contain one large and one small cell. The large cell will become the pollen tube later on, and the small cell eventually divides further to form two sperm nuclei. In the embryo sac, on the other hand, of the flower, the large haploid megaspore undergoes three mitotic divisions, right? And again, two of these cells produced, okay, will fuse together, thus becoming one cell with two nucleus inside. Meaning out of these 7 cells that are produced, 6 are haploid and 1 is diploid because the 2 cells fused, thereby containing 2 sets of chromosomes. Now, this large central cell that contains the 2 nuclei and the egg cell will participate in the fertilization. After a pollen grain lands on the sticky surface of the stigma, a pollen tube emerges. The pollen grain's 2 haploid sperm nuclei enter the pollen tube as it grows. Okay? Now, as it grows through the tissue of the style toward the ovary. So it's actually the pollen tube which leads for the 2 sperm nuclei to reach the ovary. Okay? And then, when the pollen tube reaches the ovule inside the ovary, it discharges the 2 sperm nuclei into the embryo sac. One sperm nucleus. Okay, I want you to look in illustration or step number 2. Alright? One sperm nucleus actually fertilizes the egg cell, which is at the entry, and the other sperm, okay, will fuse onto the central sac, okay, the embryo sac central cells 2 nuclei, okay, and the result is a triploid cell that will become a tissue called the endosperm. Okay, so the endosperm is composed of parenchyma cells that store food for the developing embryo. Which one is the embryo? The egg cell and the sperm cell that has combined. What becomes the endosperm? It's the central cell and the other sperm cell that has fused together. Hence, this phenomenon is called as double fertilization. And double fertilization is important because the food storage, which will come from the endosperm tissues later on, protects the zygote that is forming. Now, immediately after fertilization, the ovule contains an embryo sac with a diploid zygote and a triploid endosperm. The ovule eventually develops into a seed, a plant embryo together with its stored food, which is the endosperm, and hence surrounded by a seed coat. So this one is actually the seed, and the seed has originated or has developed from the ovule. On the other hand, the ovary will grow further or rapidly to form the fruit. And the fruit is the one that protects the seed for it to maintain or success in terms of reproduction. Again, fruits are developed from the ovaries of the flower. And fruits have 2 main functions, one of which is the protection of the seeds. And many developing fruits contain chemicals that animals find distasteful. So the immature seeds inside remain safe from herbivory. Once the seeds are mature, however, the fruit changes. It becomes soft, sweet, and appealing to animals. These changes relate to the second function of fruits, which is to promote seed dispersal by animals, wind, and water. So regardless of the transportation mode, the seeds are often deposited far from the parent plant, promoting reproductive success by minimizing competition between parent and offspring. Many animals disperse fruits and seeds. Birds and mammals spread seeds when spiny fruits attach to their feathers or fur. On the other hand, squirrels and other nut-hoarding animals also disperse seeds. The uneaten seeds may actually germinate on the ground, but also seeds that are induced by animals will not be digested by the body. So when it is eliminated along with fecal matter, seeds also escape from the digestive tract of the animal. In here, it can germinate to become a new plant. Wind and water can also distribute seeds. Wind dispersed fruits such as those of dandelions and maples have wings or other structures that catch air currents. Water dispersed fruits include gourds and coconuts, which may drift across the ocean before colonizing distant lands. Now, in summary, pollination brings pollen to the stigma. Pollination is the placing of pollen on the stigma of a carpel. Double fertilization yields zygote and endosperm. After pollination, the pollen tube discharges two sperm into the female gametophyte. Two sperm are needed for double fertilization, a process in which one sperm fertilizes the egg, forming a zygote to eventually become an embryo, while the other sperm combines with the central cell having two nuclei to give rise to the food-storing endosperm. A seed is an embryo and its food supply inside a seed coat. A seed is an embryo while the endosperm is the food supply and the seed coat acts for protection. Next, the fruit develops from the ovary. After fertilization, the ovary develops into a fruit. And lastly, fruits protect and disperse seeds. The fruit protects the seeds and aids in dispersal, and animals, wind, and water disperse these seeds to new habitats.